Attention is just so vital to everything we do, right? We learn by paying attention. We have social rewards from paying attention to other people. And conversely, when our attention spans are short, we miss out, right? We can't be productive. We can't fulfill our potential.
Welcome to the Invigor Medical Podcast, where we sit down with medical professionals and discuss a full spectrum of health-related subjects. It all starts in 3, 2, 1.
I'm so excited. We're back this morning recording with Dr. Gloria Mark. We're so honored to welcome her. She's the Chancellor's Professor of Informatics at the University of California, Irvine, and a renowned expert in human-computer interaction. She's also the author of the insightful book, Attention Span. Dr. Mark's groundbreaking research explores the impact of digital media on our lives, unraveling the complexities of multitasking, interruptions, and how our attention span is being shaped by technology. I am so excited for this conversation because it is something I feel that is coming up more and more. So welcome, Dr. Mark. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I have to be honest, I was listening to you as a guest on some other podcasts, and I was fascinated by your research and all you've studied. I'm so excited for this conversation. So I already know a little bit that you didn't get started in this field, but you actually started in art. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
I started out as an artist, never thought I would do anything else.
I mean, that's quite a departure.
It was. The reality of trying to make a living in art hit me. And I really didn't want to do a day job to support art. So I wanted my day job to be my primary job.
Right.
So I started, thinking, what can I do, with an art degree? I was good at science and math, and I ended up going into the field of psychology.
Wow.
I was very, very interested in psychology. Didn't immediately get involved with looking at computers and technology. That came a little bit later. But when I did, I had the psychological background to try to understand how people use devices.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
In your book, I was listening to it and kind of your journey, and I thought that the interaction that you had with that one professor where you're like, hey, I really want to get into this program, and he's asking you about your credentials and all that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I'm sure that you can tell it way better than I could.
Sure. So, I went back to graduate school. And I had absolutely no experience in anything except art, but I needed a job. And so I saw an ad for a job as a research assistant for an information science professor. I had no idea what information science was. And so I went in, I applied for the job, and the professor, his name was Manfred Kochin. I think he assumed I, knew a lot more than I did. And so he started asking me, do I code? Nope. Do I know queuing theory? Nope. Do I know fuzzy network theory? Nope. I didn't know anything that he asked me. So I just picked up my backpack and said thank you and started to walk out of the room. And he called after me and he said, well, wait a minute, what can you do? And I said, well, I can paint and draw. And he told me to come back and sit down. And then he said, before he got his PhD in math at MIT, he took classes at the Art Students League in New York City.
Wow.
That was such an incredible story.
So we started talking about art for like almost 2 hours.
Wow.
And at the end of the conversation, he said, I have a grant to study the discovery process. Do you think you could write about and study the discovery process of artists? And I said, of course I could. I mean, I was very, very young, very naive, probably overconfident. I knew how artists make discoveries.
Of course you did.
what I didn't know was how to put it into a language of science. And so that started me off on this journey of studying cognitive psychology, studying attention, and so on.
That's incredible. So I have a follow-up question with that. So attention is something that's kind of a big topic that I've spent a lot of time focusing on and trying to learn about myself, because at an early age, I was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, right? And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. One question that I have for you is, in that situation, I feel like I've been in a similar situation like that, where I've had to pivot kind of my life goals and trajectory to follow a different path. And a lot of times that means, in your case especially, like learning a new subject, learning something that's totally different than what you were learning before. I would imagine that when you were doing art, you had a lot of passion and a lot of energy that was going towards that, and so it made it very easy to pay attention to those kind of things. When you started diving more into science and getting into, coding and fuzzy statistics and all that, I'm sure that it was very challenging at times. What role did passion play in helping you keep attention to learning that? And does passion play a role?
Passion absolutely plays a role. And I have to say, I was very passionate about studying cognitive psychology. I had no idea what it was, but what I was passionate about was just learning something completely new, right? It was so foreign to me. And it's like, walking into this completely new world of things that you can learn about. So, but you really made a very good point in that it's so important to have intrinsic motivation for what you're doing, like to be intrinsically motivated from within to do something. Because if we rely on extrinsic motivation, so that's things like external rewards, like money.
Yeah.
Right? Money is a great motivator.
Your job.
That comes from the outside, right?
Yeah.
And it's so much better, and there's so much more passion involved when you're intrinsically motivated to do something. So the source of your interest stems from within yourself.
Well, and I think in the age that we live in, there's so much distraction all around, and obviously that's playing a role in attention. And would you tell us a little bit about the research that you started years and years ago, and how that's begun to develop over time, and what role the digital age and our personal devices has played in that research and the results that have changed over the years since you began it?
Yeah. So I actually started studying attention when using our devices based on my own experience. So, I was really part of studying the digital age and part of experiencing the real rise of the digital age, even from the mid-90s. And I noticed that my attention was shifting very often whenever I was on my device. It was very hard for me to stay focused on one task. I kept switching applications and switching tasks and, switching to email. And I began to wonder, is it just me, or are other people having this problem as well? So I started talking to other people, and other people started reporting the same kinds of problems. So I thought, okay, I'm a scientist. I can study this empirically. And that's what got me started studying attention spans. When we first started studying this, my students and I, we would actually shadow people in the course of doing their actual work when they're using their devices. In other words, we're not bringing them into a laboratory, which is what a lot of psychology experiments do, but we actually went to where people were, what I call creating living laboratories. So this was about 20 years ago, we would follow people around with a stopwatch. And every time they would shift their attention, shift their screen, or shift their attention to talk to someone, we would mark it on a stopwatch.
I'm sure they loved that.
After a while, people forgot about us,
Yeah.
right? So, we were just kind of flies on a wall watching people,
Observing.
observing.
Yeah.
Every time people shifted their attention, it would be start time when they started paying attention to something. When they shifted to something else, it would be stop time and then start time again. And, we noted down what they were doing. Back in, 20 years ago, this was first published in 2004, people averaged about 2.5 minutes on any screen before switching. Then along came technology developments, and computer logging software was invented. So we could actually track what people were doing in terms of switching their attention on screens without having to use stopwatches. So we began using this new technology in 2012. Attention spans shortened to about 75 seconds.
Wow.
And then more recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, we find that attention spans average 47 seconds.
Wow.
And I want to mention it's my work, but also others have replicated this. So others have found 50 seconds, 44 seconds, 47 seconds. So the average comes to about 47 seconds on any screen.
The idea, and people hear this all the time, is the attention span of a goldfish.
Right.
What was that again?
It's like what, a 10-second memory, a 30-second memory, something like that? Is that what it is? You probably know that statistic better than we do.
Yeah, I think it's been debunked.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it happens to be one of my favorite Ted Lasso quotes. Do you ever watch the show Ted Lasso? Oh my goodness. Well, that's for another. But he tells to his player, he says, why the goldfish has a 30-second memory. I want you to be a goldfish, because he'd made a mistake out on the field, and so he wanted them to just forget. So that's why I always think of Ted Lasso.
Gotcha.
You should definitely watch that. But we'll move on.
I'll put it on my list.
Okay. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the digital age and how it's playing a role. I know Derek just kind of mentioned being diagnosed with ADD as a child. And I feel like ADD and ADHD is one of those things that we're hearing thrown around so much more these days. There's more diagnoses of it, and you start to wonder, is this an issue of we're becoming more aware and more able to diagnose it, or is there actually a problem that's creating more and more of this, or is it both, a little of both? Because I feel like even for me personally, when it comes to all the devices and all the things I have at my attention, or just right at my fingertips all the time, it's so easy to just have something to pay attention to, and like being quiet, or just putting my makeup in the morning and being in silence. Like, I'm always listening to a podcast, listening to music, listening to an audiobook. Even when I'm driving, there's always something. And I think about that often, of what kind of a role is this playing in my ability to stay focused on any one thing. So could you speak to that a little bit about what role you believe this digital age and the personal devices is having on, ADD, or a perception of ADD, or the tendencies of it within people?
Yeah. So it's certainly playing a role. Digital devices are playing a big role in affecting our attention. ADHD diagnoses are going up, but it's unclear if it's due to just a greater awareness or an expansion of the criteria for what constitutes ADHD. So it's just not clear, or whether there's actually an increase in cases, true cases. Certainly, the fact that we're sitting in front of the world's largest candy store, the fact that we're walking around with supercomputers that we can put into our pockets, where we can access information and people at any time, of course that plays a role as well. And there's so many other factors involved of why we're just drawn to checking our devices and looking at new kinds of information. We're curious beings, we're social beings. There's a lot more that goes into that. Personality plays a role as well. So so a lot of the way that digital devices are designed, for example, they're mobile, portable, we have access to, just a nearly infinite source of information because new information is continually being created on the web. So there's just so many factors that are involved.
On top of that, I know that I've read a couple of books specifically talking about this, how a lot of companies know and have studied, read a lot of the studies that I'm sure that you've done and other professionals in your field have done of how to best capture people's attention. And so not only is it that these devices are, have a proclivity to be attention grabbing, the people that are making the apps and that are, creating the things are intentionally making them even more attention grabbing and even more of a black hole for our thoughts. So, that being said, I know in a lot of your work, you've talked about like balanced attention. So my understanding of this is, and you can correct me if you're wrong, but balanced attention is essentially, we don't necessarily want to villainize technology or the phone and say, this is the source of all of our troubles.
Throw it away, kids.
Right, exactly, because it does have really good applications in some specific situations.
And super necessary in life and jobs and work and all these things. Like we rely on it.
Yeah.
I don't even have a landline anymore. Who does?
Yeah, I don't think anyone does. I mean, there might be a few, but but essentially, can you maybe dive a little bit more into this idea of balanced attention and how it can essentially maybe help frame our outlook on devices and how we can best deal with them?
Yeah. So let me start by saying that people have a limited amount of cognitive resources. And you can think of the cognitive resources or cognitive capacity as being our attentional capacity. So imagine that you wake up after a wonderful night's sleep. Doesn't happen very often, but imagine that this is the case. You're starting your day with a full tank of cognitive capacity, attentional resources. And then things we do throughout the day drain that capacity. So focused attention actually can be draining, right? Because it requires effort to pay attention to something. And we can't have nonstop focus for long periods of time in the same way that we can't lift weights continuously without taking a break, right? So, and you might see on the web, there's all kinds of, ads that say, hey, focus 10 hours straight, here you can achieve nonstop focus. Humans can't, right? We're fallible beings. And so it's really important for us to be aware of the limitations in our attentional capacity. And so we can switch the kind of attention that we're paying to things. So we can switch from being very focused to switching to do something that's easy and engaging, and it helps us restore our cognitive resources. The best thing of all is taking a break. Stepping away from your computer is, that's the best way of all to replenish. But, sometimes for various reasons, you might have 10 minutes that you can devote to something and your brain just feels fried. You were just in a meeting and it was exhausting and you just need to kind of do something different. So yeah, you can do something easy, engaging, but here's the key. The key is to not get yourself stuck in a rabbit hole. So of course, everyone would love to play games all day, but that's not realistic, and it's not good for us, right? It's not good for our mental well-being to simply play games or watch movies all day,
right?
But it's okay to do it for a short while, for a few minutes, and that's what we mean by balanced attention. Is that you're not experiencing focused attention, which is effortful, but you're switching and you're doing something easy, or best of all, taking a break to just give yourself a chance to replenish those resources.
And be quiet and just sit in silence, even maybe sometimes is beneficial.
That's also wonderful,
Yeah.
right? To be able to just sit back, to contemplate, meditate, even. These are all ways that can help replenish us. There's, in my book, I write about Maya Angelou, who was a great writer and poet and very, very prolific as well. And she talked about having her big mind and little mind. And her big mind was what she used for doing her really important work, her writing, her poetry. But then she would take a break and she would use what she called little mind. And she usually would do crossword puzzles or some simple game, playing cards. And she did that to just kind of step back, take a break, replenish herself. And so her balance was between using her big mind and her little mind.
Yeah.
And I just love the way she characterizes it, because the little mind actually plays an important supporting role in helping us achieve what we want to when we use our big mind.
That makes
Definitely.
a whole lot of sense.
That reminds me of something that might be somewhat analogous. And when you talked about that in your book, I absolutely love that, because I'm like totally relate to having big mind tasks where I'm like all in, trying to focus, get something done, and then little mind tasks where it's more of just relaxing.
Yeah.
But it makes me think. I've heard other thoughts on this. Is it analogous to like concrete thinking versus diffuse thinking? And to kind of dive into what I mean by that, concrete thinking is like very linear, very logical, very much like, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, whereas diffuse thinking is much more creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's different. So you're talking about what's called divergent and convergent thinking. Convergent thinking is when you're really concentrating and focusing. And divergent thinking is like brainstorming, right? Coming up with different ideas. Both of those kinds of attention can require a lot of effort, right? So it's not necessarily the case that divergent thinking, where you're brainstorming, is easier, right? Because you can also put in a lot of effort. So I would say, both convergent and divergent thinking can involve a lot of effort.
Heavy cognitive load. Yeah.
Yeah, or also could be quite easy. For example, if you're very engaged in watching a Netflix show, that might involve convergent thinking, right? But it's easy. You're not putting in a lot of effort.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Well, the question that's coming to my mind as you're chatting is, I think that we put, and you've probably had many conversations around this, there's almost like this, what's the word? Putting on a pedestal this idea that we can multitask. That it's like, oh, well, I've got so many different things going at once and I'm really good at doing all of that. And I've got so much I can juggle, but I can do it all at once and it's fine. Like everything's swirling in the bowl, but I got all the marbles are staying in the bowl. None are falling out, maybe a few here and there. But it's really celebrated in our culture, I feel like, to be able, I'm juggling this, I'm juggling that, I'm a single mom, I've got the job, I've got the podcast, I'm working out, I'm eating health, it's like this and that. So would you speak a little bit to that, because I have a feeling you're going to tell us that's a bit of a farce and that multitasking and being, quote, good at multitasking isn't exactly good.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
You nailed it.
Okay.
So yes, it's a badge of honor that people wear to be able to say, hey, I can multitask. I can do all these tasks at the same time. Well, first of all, the idea of doing things in parallel is just not possible unless one of those tasks uses what's called automatic attention. So if I'm driving and talking to a passenger, the driving can become very automatic if I'm driving a straight route, and my effort is being put into the conversation. But then all of a sudden, a car clips me in front of me.
Or you're driving in an unknown city. You don't know.
Unknown.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even with GPS.
Right.
You have to pay attention to the GPS. So you suddenly stop talking,
Yeah.
right? And all of a sudden, instead of automatic attention in driving, you're now using what's called controlled processing. So you're really needing to put some effort into your driving. So, but, most of the time, if people are working on their computers and then they say, well, I'm on a Zoom meeting and I'm doing email at the same time, I'm achieving doing two tasks at the same time. Well, guess what? When you're working on email, your attention is on the email and it's not on that Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
So you're actually switching your attention very rapidly between these two things. That's not multitasking, right? So your attention is it's divided and switching between these two different things. Now, is it good for us to multitask? The research says no, and there's 3 reasons. First of all, there is something called a switch cost. And a switch cost is the extra time that it takes to accomplish multiple tasks when you're switching between them, as opposed if you were to just do one task after another sequentially, right? So multitasking imposes a cost in time. Second, there's a cost in performance. And we know from decades of research in the laboratory where people are given tasks, switching their attention, trying to multitask, they make more errors. There was a recent study that was done with physicians that showed that when physicians were constantly multitasking because they're interrupted by patients, clinicians, devices,
nurses,
sleepers,
oh my
nurses,
gosh, so much.
It turns out that they made a number of prescribing errors.
Like a medication?
Medication, yeah.
Wow.
And some of those were quite serious. So, and that's because their attention is being pulled away, and then they have to try and come back, reorient to what they were doing.
And their time is so, I have many friends and even family members who are nurses, and talking about how much time their providers have with each patient and how it has to go and onto the, and everything's just so condensed and smushed. I cannot even imagine. I feel like I'm going crazy in my day with all the things. And then I get home and the kids are running around. We got to get to soccer practice and my phone's still dinging from work. So that feels maddening to me. So I can't imagine for a doctor, and then all that pressure, you got to get medication prescriptions correct still. Yeah. That's wild.
Yeah. But the third reason that's the nail in the coffin for multitasking is it causes stress. And it's not just an association with stress, but it actually causes stress. And, we've shown this in research. We know from others who've done laboratory studies, it raises both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. There are markers of stress in the body that rise, that indicate people are under physiological stress. And in our studies, we've also simply asked people in the workplace, if how you feel psychologically, and they report, the greater the multitasking, the more stressed they are. We've also had people wear heart rate monitors, which measures what's called heart rate variability, which is also an indicator of stress and also shows there's this correlation. The more you're switching on your screen and between your devices, the greater stress you have as measured by heart rate variability.
Wow. And, as you're talking about this, I'm thinking, because I think that it's easy for us all to kind of take this, what you're saying as an analogy and apply it into kind of the work life, right? Because I feel like we're talking a little bit professionally, but as you're talking, I'm thinking about just, being at home and being on my phone and looking at a text message I just received, and then trying to work on dinner, and then talking to my daughter, and then checking my social media for no particular reason other than I saw there was a notification on there, and then the TV's going on and my son wants me to see what he's looking up at there. And I'm starting to think about that, and I'm realizing how all that feels in my body in the moment, and it is stress. Yeah. I think that I'm so used to it. I'm not fully aware of it happening in the moment. And so it's that kind of like chronic stress that we've talked about like multiple times on the show, but I haven't really thought about it in that way as that being multitasking. And I think, you know, it's inevitable to some degree that we're all as adults going to have some measure of multitasking within our day, especially I feel like if you have little kids, it's like there's just no way around that. But, you know, what would you say to, you know, someone in my position as a single mom working a full-time job, doing a side hustle, having a, you know, a big social life? What are some things that I could do to become more aware in the moment of when that's happening, and how I could do better at my attention, and what those benefits would then be?
Yeah. So let me also clarify this by saying sometimes we just have to react to the demands of our environment, especially for people who have kids. I've been there, and I know, you know, you can't ignore your kids when they need something.
You really can't. So, sometimes you wish you're like, I am at max capacity here, bro, but you know, they're yours. You got to take care of it. Exactly.
Yeah. But it turns out that about half the time we interrupt ourselves. So it's not just that we're reacting to the demands of our environments, whether it's the workplace or at home, but we just bring this on ourselves. And in fact, if, you know, I would see this in my research, I'd be observing someone and they'd be typing away, you know, writing a report. And then for no apparent reason, they suddenly switch to their email or they switch to social media. There's no explanation for this, but it's some kind of urge they have or some memory they have, but something is just causing them to switch.
Yeah.
That we can do something about. So one of the first things that people can do is to learn to understand the reasons why you're switching. And so many of the things that we do when we switch our attention are unconscious. They're, for example, you know, I pick up my phone and because I see it and I have this impulse to grab it and check it, that's an unconscious reaction. And we can do something about that. Or I have this urge to check email and wonder if anyone has contacted me, or check social media, or check the news.
Sure.
We can do something about that. So, you know, during the pandemic, I took a course in mindfulness and my university offered it. It was very valuable. And I realized that some of the principles of mindfulness that we can apply to when we're using our devices. So mindfulness teaches us to be focused on the present.
Yes.
And I realized that if you're really focused on the present, we can learn to become aware of when we have these urges to switch our attention.
Wow.
And we can, you know, and so I probe myself and I've learned to recognize that urge and to reflect on it and to ask myself, why do I have that urge? It's usually because I'm procrastinating. I don't want to do it, or I'm bored. And then you can come up with a plan. So if you can reflect on it, the idea is to become more intentional in your actions and not let our automatic attention on our unconscious actions rule us, but to have better control. So that's one thing that we can do. Another thing is to practice what's called forethought. And forethought is about imagining how your current actions are going to affect your future self. And for me, I think the future self that I think about is at the end of the day, right? At 7:00, where do I want to be? What do I want to be doing? I want to be sitting on the couch, relaxing, reading a book, watching my favorite show. I don't want to be working on this overdue deadline that I have, right? And so if you can, you know, creating a concrete visualization of yourself at the end of the day, where you want to be, how you want to see yourself, also emotionally, Think about how you want to feel emotionally, which is probably fulfilled, rewarded, peaceful, peaceful.
Yeah.
And that can help also keep you on track.
I love that. And would you recommend, what you said about that visualization of the day and, looking forward to the end of the day and like visualizing where do I want to be? How do I want to be feeling? What do I want to have accomplished for the day? Do you recommend doing that like when you start the day or like at the end of the day, the night before? Because I've heard like do it the night before you go to bed, like a brain dump. And so then it's done and you might sleep better. But you also are saying like, your cognitive function and capability in the morning after you've hopefully had a wonderful night's rest is at its highest. And so I do feel clearer and more able to kind of do a mapping like that in the morning. But I also do appreciate the brain dump. So is this kind of like 6 one way, half dozen the other, like they both could be wonderful, see what works for you? Or what do you recommend?
Yeah, you can do both. So there are studies that show if you write down the tasks that are unfinished from that day right before you go to sleep, people actually sleep better.
Wow.
Because the idea is that if we don't write them down, we just keep rehearsing and we have anxiety about these tasks.
I can relate.
You're rehearsing it so you don't forget it.
Right.
But if you put it onto an external memory, in other words, you're writing it on a piece of paper, then it offloads all that work so we don't have to keep, having these thoughts churning around and around. And so, put it on a piece of paper, get it out of your mind, get it out of the way.
You know what that makes me think of? It makes me think of my calendar.
Yeah.
Because once I put something in my calendar, I kind of remember, oh yeah, next week I have the podcast, with Dr. Mark. But I don't remember what time of day. I don't remember what day of the week. I just know, oh yeah, that's happening next week. I don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I didn't ever think about that with tasks for a day, but because it's exactly how it works when I put things in my calendar.
Definitely.
I don't think about it till I check it again.
Yeah.
But it's also a great idea in the morning.
Okay.
To come up with the goals you want to achieve for that day.
Yeah.
So we did a study. This was with colleagues at Microsoft Research, and we asked people 2 very simple questions at the beginning of the day. What do you want to accomplish today? Like, what task do you want to accomplish? And the second, how do you want to feel today? And it turns out that these 2 questions can bring goals to mind. And people actually stayed on track better when they asked these 2 questions because they were reminded of their goals. But we also learned that goals don't last in memory very long, right? They slip away. And so people stayed on track, but then they kind of slipped off track. And so it's important to keep reminding yourself of your goals. So if it means writing it down on a piece of paper or, some other way to help remind yourself.
Right.
Of
accountability partner.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of New Year's resolutions right now, actually. It's how it's like all these big goals and ideas. And then slowly as we get into the year, that kind of goes out the window. I don't even remember what mine were. We're 9 months in. What did I even say I was going to do?
You know what's funny is one of my favorite podcasts, one of my favorite people in the podcasting space, Andrew Huberman, biggest fanboy here on the but one of the recent things he did was on goals, and he actually talked about what's called the sticky note fallacy, where essentially a lot of people think that if you write your goal on a sticky note and put it somewhere where you're going to see it every single day, that it'll remind you and you'll end up doing the thing. But what ends up happening is the human body is very good at like taking constant stimulus and essentially ignoring it, right? And so essentially, if you have this sticky note on your mirror that you look at every morning, eventually your mind is just going to tune it out. It's just going to become white noise and you won't see it. And so he's like, what's better is if, essentially if you're going to do a sticky note, write a new sticky note every day and then put it in a new place every single day. And so that way when you see it, it's a novel experience and it cues up the things in your brain that say, hey, you need to end up doing this thing,
It's a wonderful idea. And what's also really important about that is the act of writing down the goal.
Yeah.
causes you to process that information, right? Whereas if you're just, let's say you have a goal to, work on some deadline that's due at the end of the week, and you use the same sticky note, you're not processing that. You're looking at it, yeah, you're reminded of it, but the actual act of writing it down, and especially if you can write details of it, that your mind is working, and you're going to remember it better and pay better attention to it.
Yeah.
Well, and I like what you said about how you want to feel. Because also thinking about, if I'm thinking about a goal I want to accomplish, it's one thing to think about the goal, but then thinking about how I feel, not even just when it's accomplished, but how I feel in the achieving of the goal.
Yeah.
And now it feels like something I can like latch onto more, like it belongs to me rather than it's this idea out there that I would just like to be mine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and to comment on that too, I think that like a lot of times, going back to just our society that we live in general, like the goal is paramount. Like getting to there is the most important thing, and to exclusion of how we feel. And so, does it really matter if we accomplish the goal if at the end of the day we feel terrible?
Right.
And so being able to say, what do I want to do and how do I want to feel? The how do I want to feel part might actually inform the goal
even
itself
more.
And how you go about doing the specific task that you're trying to accomplish.
Tony Robbins said, I heard it once years ago, and it's always stuck with me. He's like, setting a goal and achieving a goal is not about the goal itself and achieving it. He said it's about who you become in order to achieve that goal. And I was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
I love that.
It was a whole moment for me, especially as someone who's kind of achievement oriented, again, how that felt. So I love your perspective on this, Dr. Mark, and the idea of visualizing and, where do you want to be? How do you want to feel? That just feels like such a game changer to me.
Definitely does.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Mark, I have a question. So going back to kind of the idea of task switching, of how someone might be working on a report for like 2 minutes and then suddenly just switch for no apparent reason. I would imagine that like boredom probably is a big part of that. I mean, I've been in those situations where I'm like, I would literally be willing to do anything else. In fact, one time we had to like completely rework at the back end of our system, and someone's like, hey, there's something in the back. It's looks pretty gross, and I'm like, I'll do it, please. I volunteer, I'm just like anything but this. What role does boredom play in our attention, and how can we kind of like figure out how to deal with boredom?
Yeah. So boredom plays a big role. And, the best defense against being distracted is to keep your goal in mind, right? When our goals slip, that's when other things can come into play. And when we're bored, we're much more susceptible to distractions.
Yeah.
And, people are bored a lot. In fact, we measured this in people throughout the day. And, boredom is kind of, it happens throughout the day. It's, not just like a single point in the day, but, throughout the day, people experience boredom. So it's always there, right? And it's really important to understand it and to reflect on it, right? We shouldn't ignore it, but we should reflect on it and think about, okay, maybe this report is really boring, but I've got to do it. So let me come up with a plan that I'm going to spend 30 minutes on it, and then I'll reward myself by, reading the news or something that's going to make me happy.
Yeah.
So is that kind of like a Pomodoro technique? I might be saying it wrong. Pomodoro is like where you set a 45-minute timer and then
25 minutes.
25 minutes timer, and then it's like another 20-minute break or something along those lines?
Yeah. Well, what I think is better than a Pomodoro technique is for people to understand their own natural rhythm of attention. So, Pomodoro technique assumes that everyone has this, 25-minute stretch of attention that, they can use, and then there's a 5-minute break. And it works for some people, but there's a lot of individual differences. And what we've found is that people tend to have different peaks of attention throughout the day. For most people, there's a peak in focus between mid and late morning, and then there's another peak mid to late afternoon. And so we talked earlier about this idea of balancing attention, right? So we can't have focused attention continually throughout the day, but we can switch off. We can do things that require more focus. Then we can pull back, do things that are easy but also engaging. And sometimes, it's okay to be bored. But remember, if you're bored, you're more susceptible to distraction. So I would say rather than a Pomodoro technique, what makes more sense is for people to understand their own personal rhythms of attention when their attention is at their peak. A lot of it has to do with your chronotype. So if you're an early type, love to wake up with the dawn, your attention is going to peak a lot earlier in the day. And someone who's a late type, night owl, you're going to tend to sleep longer. You won't be at your best until a little bit later. Takes time for the gears and wheels of your mind to kind of start moving. And be aware of what your, personal attention type is, and plan your days so that you do your hardest work and the work that requires the most creativity for those times when your attention is at its peak. So really leverage that time. And for goodness sake, don't do email during those times. don't do social media, but use it for really doing productive work, and you'll be at your best.
Yeah, I've heard some people refer to those ebbs and flows of focus as like ultradian cycles, which is slightly different than circadian cycles. But I'm sure you know way more about ultradian cycles probably than I do. But one technique that some people say to try and protect that time is to put their phone on airplane mode. And essentially be like, okay, there's no incoming distractions. If I need to reach out, I always have the ability to, turn it off and do what I need to do. But really safeguarding that time of peak attention to be able to get the hardest work done, I think is incredibly important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And environment plays a big role. So yeah, put your phone in your desk drawer, lock it if you need to. There are actually some hardware that's being sold where you can lock your phone up, right? And like a Faraday cage, so that it
and then you have no way to get it out.
well, at some point you do.
Right. Yeah.
But also to keep your environment clear so that you're not distracted by what's around you. That's and it also means your desktop, turn off notifications. That's an easy thing to do, so that you're not always reacting unconsciously.
Right, because it just happens.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like most phones now have the ability for like the do not disturb, or mine specifically has the focus option and I can choose, if there's certain people, like I always have whoever my children are in the care of, whether it's the school or a family member or whatever, that no matter what, they can always break through my do not disturb. But otherwise it's incredible how it feels when I unlock my phone. Like if I actually need to look at something on there for what I'm focusing on, all of my notifications are gone. There's no like the little red number of how many emails. They're gone. That's amazing. I remember the first time I saw it and I was like, oh, wow, I feel light. I didn't even realize how much that weighed on me, because it does. It's like this thing in the back of my mind. Like I need to look at that. I need to check it. Who have I not, who sent this message or this email, and I want to get it gone. I want to respond to people and things and make sure I'm not missing anything. And I didn't realize until the first time I used that function what a weight that was on me. And so I want to start using it more. And I'm loving your techniques, to keep in mind that, multitasking is not beneficial and it's actually detrimental. Like thinking about it being a causer of stress You know, I think that's amazing. I'm going to keep that in mind. You talking about, you know, setting blocks of time to work and a reward for after that. And I think the thing that's, you know, I'm walking away with even the most of all the things you've said is to take a moment to check in and be mindful. And why am I bored right now? And remind myself of my goal and how I want to feel at the end of the day. I think that's the thing that's going to stick with me most from this conversation.
But let me also add to something I said earlier that the best breaks of all are, you know, stepping away from your computer, but also going outside in nature.
Yeah.
And there are studies that show that just 20 minutes in nature has this restorative quality for people.
I believe that.
And, you know, right now I'm living in New York City and I make it a point every day to go to a park, right? So I exercise and I exercise in a park. And it really is rejuvenating, even in the middle of New York City.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I bet. That's amazing.
You know, I feel like that one specific tip that you just gave there has been something that has been a common trend with
Oh my gosh.
so many of our guests.
Every single guest, I feel like it's like 20 minutes outside walk. Like if you could do one thing, it's that one thing. It's wild.
Yeah.
And it's so incredibly impactful. And I think even you talk about this in your office and I talk about this in my office where it's like somebody always tries to, what do you guys call them? Walkies?
Yeah, we call them walkies.
Walkies. You like halfway through the day or multiple points through the day, you know, to just be like, hey, I'm going for a walk. You want to get out for a minute just to, you know, and we're in the city. It's not like there's even a park nearby, but it's still just to get outside and walk. It's incredible. Yes. And that kind of reset when you do get back to your computer, how it feels.
Refreshing.
And it's rejuvenating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I hadn't really thought about that before, but that does make sense now that you say that. That's playing a role in my ability to focus and pay attention.
Yeah, think of this metaphor of having a tank of cognitive resources. And they're precious resources, they're limited. And think about, you know, what's draining that tank and what's replenishing it. And going outside, especially in nature and, you know, moving around can really help replenish that tank.
I love that, the visualization of how are you replenishing? Because you're right. I think we do tend to get in a cycle of like, oh, well, it's endless. I could do this forever, even though obviously we cannot. So, wow, I have so enjoyed this conversation.
I've loved it.
Is there any other question? I mean, I feel like I have so many other questions, but also we can only be here for so long.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to have Dr. Mark back on.
We'd love to have you back
Yes.
on. The only question that maybe this would be a conversation for another day is I've been fascinated recently by AI and the developments of AI, ChatGPT and all those things. Maybe just could you share like a brief thought on the effect AI is going to potentially have on, you know, our attentions as individuals?
Yeah, well, I can say a lot about this.
I bet you could.
Let me just very quickly say, I worry that we will become more disconnected with information that's important to us. So, you know, we're going to be offloading a lot of our work to AI, for example, writing these reports. And of course, a lot of things that we offload to AI might be beneficial, you know, work that's boring, mundane kinds of work. But at the same time, because our hands are not on that, you know, creating that content, we will become disconnected from it. We'll be producing more and more information because it will be easy, right? But at the same time, it's going to be harder for us to keep up with managing all that information.
Yeah.
And of course, the AI can help us manage that information. But, you know, we still will have a degree of separation from that information. And I worry, another thing I worry about is how it might affect our critical reasoning ability, especially for kids, right?
Yeah.
As AI starts to enter the classroom, and it's being used more and more for various things, I really worry about, you know, will we lose our skills in critical reasoning?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. That is a whole other episode.
Completely
maybe.
different episode, but we would love to have you come back to talk more
Yes.
about that. But
Sure.
Dr. Mark, thank you so much for being on our show. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you've done?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, www.gloriamark.com. It's all one word, Gloria Mark. And you can learn more about what I do and about the book.
Fantastic.
And would love to hear from people.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
And your book, Attention Span, I'm just guessing that's in wherever books are sold. Is that correct?
It is. It's you can find it on Amazon. There's also on my website, there are links to it. You can also find me on LinkedIn and on Twitter as well.
Wonderful.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I found this to be very fascinating, but I also think a very important conversation. So I hope that we were able to keep the attention of all of our listeners. And for those of you that stuck around, thank you for being with us today. And especially you, Dr. Mark, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.